How you doing?
Mind if I ask you why you decided to set up cameras right here while my guys are working?
We're doing something called a conversation. I'm not even talking to your guys at all. They're going about their business, and I'm going about mine. It only takes 5 minutes. I'll be out of your way very soon. I appreciate the cooperation.
What?
I appreciate it. I mean, I know I'm not allowed to talk to these guys, so I'm not. What?
It was really interesting to watch you sitting there as you were setting up and somebody came up to you off camera and said, you know, what are you doing here? Does that happen to you a lot?
It happens all the time. In fact, there were several people who've come by and asked us what we're doing here and asking us not to talk to any of the workers here, and they're just very curious, and I guess it's their job to prevent all these people from talking to the press. I'm not sure why that is. And Dan, BP recently rescinded the standing order that it's had within for the 20+ thousand people who work for it, telling them not to talk to the press. I don't think that's observed here. People everywhere you go say, well, we can't tell you. Even if you ask them who they work for, they tell you that they can't even tell you that. So it's kind of a little odd tidbit and strange dynamic of working here.
But it seems like there's a sort of pervasive paranoia, and I'm not quite sure I fully understand why.
Well, I don't know if you're seeing what's going on behind me, but apparently they're clearing some of the workers who were behind us, which is the reason we set up this shot, and they pushed them away farther down the beach to be away from this shot, I guess, fearing additional publicity. I don't know why, especially because there's been so much criticism of BP and the Coast Guard and the federal response saying they haven't done enough to combat this oil spill. And here we see dozens of workers on this beach wearing little booties and carrying around shovels and picking up the most minute speck of oil of these little patties of tar balls that sort of look like this off the beach. They seem to be doing their job. I think they should be commended for it and maybe receive a little bit of press for it, but I guess there's no interest.
One of the other fascinating things is this sort of two-sided, somewhat paradoxical attitude that people down there have toward BP. On the one hand, people are incredibly angry at the company. On the other hand, nobody wants to see the company go bankrupt because so many people rely on that industry.
Rely on the industry, and right now they rely specifically on the income they get from BP. There are thousands of people involved in the cleanup, so they are absolutely dependent on BP because right now, obviously, fishing is gone for the season, and it creates this very tense relationship with BP. On the one hand, people here would like to condemn it. On the other hand, they're afraid of going on the record. And we've noticed this most starkly, Dan, when dealing with the folks who've fallen ill from working out in the oil spill. We've had countless people tell us that they are ill, that they have headaches, that they have upper respiratory problems. And remember, Dan, after the Exxon Valdez disaster in 1989, 7,000 workers who had been involved in the spill, and this is according to Exxon's clinical data, fell ill with upper respiratory distress. Now, we don't know the numbers here, but similar types of dispersants are being used. People are exposed to similar types of fumes, and it's hotter out here, so the fumes rise and are even more potent. And yet we haven't seen people come forward because they need these jobs. They know that once BP goes away and this oil's cleaned up, the fisheries are not going to remain, so they have to rely on this cash income now, and they're not willing to go against BP, and certainly not on the record, certainly not in front of.
Earlier in the day, we saw other crews bring in crate after crate of polluted wildlife to this triage center on Grand Isle. That's where we found the rules for capturing images of these birds had changed.
Ma'am?
What?
I'm going to have to ask you to stop taking pictures of me.
We were asked to turn our cameras off, and this official with the Louisiana State Animal Response Team, or LSART, a contractor hired by BP, told us we could not enter the bird triage center, even though we received permission to do just that from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
LSART makes the last call on this? LSART makes the final call?
I make the final call based on the condition of the birds coming in.
Todd Baker with the Louisiana Fish and Wildlife Service says it's out of an abundance of caution.
It's more important for the animal, for the animals to have a quiet, calm, controlled area at this point.
Talking to the rescuers was another problem. One volunteer told us off camera he had signed a document stating he would not talk to the media. Another rescue worker who told us he would be fired if he spoke up instead gave us these images.
And to add insult to injury, in early July, CNN's Anderson Cooper reported that the media would be slapped with a $40,000 fine and a Class D felony charge for violating new laws for photographers in the media, as shown in this video.
A new rule announced today, backed by the force of law and the threat of fines and felony charges. A rule that will prevent reporters and photographers and anyone else from getting anywhere close to booms and oil-soaked wildlife in just about any place we need to be. By now, you're probably familiar with cleanup crews stiff-arming the media, private security blocking cameras, ordinary workers clamming up, some not even saying who they're working for because they're afraid of losing their jobs. BP has said again and again that's not their policy, yet again and again it has happened. We've seen it. But that's BP. Now the government apparently is getting in on the act, despite what Admiral Thad Allen promised about transparency just nearly a month ago. Here's what he said back then.
I have put out a written directive, and I can provide it for the record, that says the media will have uninhibited access anywhere we're doing operations, except for two things: if it's a security or a safety problem. That is my policy.
Uninhibited access unless it's a security or safety problem. Well, the Coast Guard today announced new rules keeping photographers and reporters and anyone else from coming within 65 feet of any response vessel or booms out on the water or on beaches. 65 feet. Now, in order to get closer, you have to get direct permission from the Coast Guard captain of the Port of New Orleans. You have to call up the guy. What this means is that oil-soaked birds on islands surrounded by boom, you can't get close enough to take that picture. Shots of oil on beaches with booms, stay 65 feet away. Pictures of oil-soaked booms uselessly laying in the water because they haven't been collected like they should, you can't get close enough to see that. And believe me, that is out there. But you only know that if you get close to it, and now you can't without permission. Violators could face a fine of $40,000 and Class D felony charges. What's even more extraordinary is that the Coast Guard tried to make the exclusion zone 300 feet before scaling it back to 65 feet. Here's how Admiral Allen defends it.
It's not unusual at all for the Coast Guard to establish either safety or security zones around any number of facilities or activities for public safety and for the safety of the equipment itself. We would do this for marine events, fireworks demonstrations, cruise ships going in and out of port.
So this is the exact same logic that federal wildlife officials used to prevent CNN on 2 occasions from getting pictures of oiled birds that have been collected. Pictures like that we're about to show you, which are obviously deeply disturbing. Pictures of oiled gulls that we just happened to catch. Suddenly we were told after that day we couldn't catch it anymore. So keeping prying eyes out of marshes, away from booms, off the beaches is now government policy. When asked why now, after all this time, Thad Allen said he'd gotten some complaints from local officials worried people might get hurt. Now, we don't know who these officials are. We'd like to, but transparency is apparently not a high priority with Thad Allen either these days. Maybe he's accurate, and some officials are concerned, and that's their right. But we've heard far more from local officials about not being able to get a straight story from the government or BP. I've met countless local officials desperate for pictures to be taken and stories written about what is happening in their communities. We're not the enemy here. Those of us down here trying to accurately show what is happening, we are not the enemy. I've not heard about any journalist who's disrupted relief efforts. No journalist wants to be seen as having slowed down the cleanup or made things worse. If a Coast Guard official asked me to move, I'd move. But to create a blanket rule that everyone has to stay 65 feet away from boom and boats, that doesn't sound like transparency. Frankly, it's a lot like in Katrina when they tried to make it impossible to see recovery efforts of people who died in their homes. If we can't show what is happening, warts and all, no one will see what's happening. And that makes it very easy to hide failure and hide incompetence, and makes it very hard to highlight the hard work of cleanup crews and the Coast Guard. We are not the enemy here. We found out today 2 public broadcasting journalists reporting on health issues say they've been blocked again and again from visiting a federal mobile medical unit in Venice, a trailer where cleanup workers are being treated. It's known locally as the BP compound, and these 2 reporters say everyone they've talked to, from BP to the Coast Guard to Health and Human Services in Washington, has been giving them the runaround. We're not talking about a CIA station here. We're talking about a medical trailer that falls under the authority of, guess who? Thad Allen. The same Thad Allen who promised transparency all those weeks ago. We are not the enemy.